Hello and welcome to OurGame with myself, Shane Stapleton, John Meyler in the middle there to talk all things hurling, and Fintan O'Toole from the 42. He'll be staying on throughout. We're going to have Davy Burke, who was the Kildare under-20 manager to an All-Ireland title a couple of years ago, and Wicklow manager a couple of years ago. We're going to jump straight into it here. The first 15 minutes are live there on YouTube and Twitter, and the rest patreon.com/OurGame if you want to see the full show. But John Meyler, there's been an awful lot of talk of anti-Limerick bias recently. You know, the red cards to Grode Hegarty to Keane Lynch. Are you buying into this talk that there could be a very consistent anti-Limerick bias out there, or is too much being made of it?
No, I don't think there's any anti-Limerick feeling out there. I think Limerick have won a few All-Irelands in the last few years, and they're there to be knocked off their perch. So teams, that play them in the league now, which is ultra competitive at the moment because the championship is coming up shortly, they're going to find out ways to try and upset the Limerick fellas. Hegarty, Kyle Hayes, Keane Lynch was desperately unfortunate to be sent off last Saturday. Shouldn't have been sent off. And you're going to do your best to wind up these fellas and to get an advantage from that. So Limerick play on the edge. They're big men, they're strong men, they're physical. That's the type of hurling they play. And if you play against them and are aggressive in the tackling and all of that, there's going to be sendings off because referees now are more conscious of being under scrutiny from, supervisors up in the stand and things like that. But, it's championship hurling now, and the Munster Championship is going to be really intensive this year. So, there are going to be big decisions, big calls to be made. So it may be looking at the possibility of, VAR, if VAR came into the Fitzgibbon last Saturday, Keane wouldn't have been sent off. So look, championship matches are played on the edge, Shane, that, and there's going to be incidents in games.
Yeah, Harry Byrne on Patreon commented, Limerick are the first county outside of the big three in hurling and Kerry Dublin in football to dominate over a 4 or 5 year period. They're not used to the attention of being number one, and the best thing for them is to actually feel like the whole world is against them. Do you agree with that sentiment, that they're not used to being in this position as a county, and maybe the likes of Cork or Kilkenny or even Tipperary?
Limerick have been there, Shane, for the last 4 or 5 years. They've won 3 All-Irelands. They've been there since 17, 18. So they're there now 5 years. They're going into their 6th championship. You know what I mean? And Kylie will have embedded in. And if you look at their history over the last few years, they tend to get 1 or 2 people sent off early on in the league. It happened against us in 2018 or 19. Galan was sent off. So those things will happen. And come Munster Championship, when it starts up, there'll be a small little bit more of a, referees will probably be a small bit softer and allow a few more things to go on. So look, it's competitive. They play on the edge, and that's what you want to see. There's a physical edge to Limerick's game, and everybody knows that. If you match them, there's obviously going to be incidences, and you'll see that coming up in the championship.
Limerick, or Fintan, what's your take on that, the talk of an anti-Limerick bias?
I think there's 2 kind of separate issues. Like one, I suppose the refereeing thing you were alluding to about the kind of recent sending offs. And then the second one is, I think it just happens when champions are kind of in the spotlight, frequent champions that have won a few titles over a period of time. And maybe as well, it's kind of corresponding with what's happening in football at the moment. It's one of the first times you're heading into the championship where the football appears wide open. And in a lot of people's eyes, you're looking around to see who's going to be able to challenge Limerick. Like if you think about when Dublin were kind of in their pomp, people were looking back on All-Ireland finals where Mayo had challenged them, and they've been these epic games and they've been very close. But the last 2 All-Ireland finals Limerick have won against Cork last year and Waterford the year before, they won them comfortably on the scoreboard in the end. So there's an element of, I think, people are looking around looking for challengers. Are the challengers there? And then maybe the kind of, I suppose, the closer scrutiny that applied to Limerick, I suppose, in terms of trying to see flaws and trying to find ways to bring them down. It's probably a bit similar to what happened. I suppose the conversation with Kilkenny were kind of at their height, kind of around 2008, 2009. But I think if a big challenger comes along to kind of push them very, very close, like say Tipperary did from 1910 on, I think the conversation kind of changes a bit, and there's not as much focus. But in terms of their refereeing decisions, I think the 2 recent ones have been pretty black and white. I think Garrod Hegarty deserved to be a red card. I think most people then, even though it was for a different team, it's accepted the Keane Lynch NUIG decision was incorrect then last Saturday.
John, it's a long time since Cork have beaten Limerick at this stage. They're meeting in the Gaelic grounds on Saturday night. You were the manager the last time in the Munster clash in 2019, and I just sent on an image of the team sheet from that game, and an awful lot of the Cork players are no longer there. I think there's 1 player from every line of the field that's no longer there. So this there's constant transition happening. So I'm just wondering, how much for belief do Cork need a victory here when you consider they lost by 8 points, and 16 points to Limerick last year?
I think Cork need a victory. They've played 2 rather easy games in the league against Clare and against Offaly, and they've won those well. I think they need to put down a marker this weekend. But as you said there's been a massive change, in the last few years, and you've lost a lot of physical players, the likes of Colm Spillane, Bill Cooper, Owen Cadigan, Aidan Walsh, and those who physically are able to stand up to the Limerick guys. And now the Cork are going for more speed, more athleticism and that. But I think it's critical that they lay down a marker this weekend, and they'll do that with speed and with skill and with Lehane back as well. So there's big question marks coming at the weekend, and Cork have to really address those and answer those emphatically against Limerick. Limerick have lost their first 2 league games, shot a lot of wides against Wexford the last day, and Galway got stuck into them last Sunday or last week. So there's huge question marks over Limerick's 2 performances and coming into Cork now, and Cork winning their first 2 matches against Clare and Offaly. The game against Offaly last week was a poor game in terms of a contest. So it'll be interesting to see how that game will go on the weekend.
How do you think the development of Cork's game plan is coming along? I think the last time we spoke was when we had you on with Derek Hogan last summer around the time of the Cork-Clare game. And, Cork were still in the early stages of building, running the ball through the lines, working it out from the back. Obviously, it didn't go to plan in the All-Ireland final. But where do you think Cork are at in terms of changing their style?
I think they won't change their style. I think it's going to be more of playing the ball through the lines, playing the ball at speed, as quick as possible up to Shane Kingston, and you've Barrett and those coming into the forwards as well. But it'll be one of speed and skill versus, skill and physicality that Limerick will bring to it. So there'll be a contrast of 2 styles. And as I said to you earlier there, like Cork have lost a lot of strong physical players. So it'll be interesting to look at the game from that perspective.
Yeah. Fintan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I suppose John would be interested to talk to us about, I suppose, some of the newer players that have come in that you would have coached, 15, under 16. Like, for example, John, know better than anyone about Mark Keane's hurling capabilities. You might be able to talk a bit about that. He's obviously probably been the most high-profile addition to the hurling panel this year to come back today as well.
Yeah, Mark was centre-back for Ballygiblin. Mark was centre-back for Ballygiblin in the junior All-Ireland final. But I think Cork have, emphasised that they're going to play Coleman there. So it's, I think Mark Keane is probably better facing the ball. But Cork need half-forwards then, like Mark Keane, that can compete then with the likes of Hannon and Morrissey and those. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other where you play Mark Keane. But you need more than Mark Keane in that attack, really. Like that Lehane is back, which is a huge plus. But the Cork need to exercise last year's All-Ireland final against Limerick at the weekend, and that's critical.
Do you fall into the category of people who think there's psychological damage from the final last year? I'd be more along the lines of saying every player has been hammered at some stage. It doesn't mean that they quit hurling after that. So do you think there will be a lasting effect from that All-Ireland final defeat?
No, I don't think there's I don't think there is. But the championship is quicker this year. You're back since 2019. You're now back to the round robin. You cannot afford to lose your game. You need momentum from the league going into the Munster Championship, and it's going to be shorter. It's going to be quicker. The games are coming on top of you, so it's critical that you do well in the league this year. Really, really critical. And then having your team set out to be ready for the Munster Championship. You can't go into the Munster Championship with maybe 1 or 2 places, up for grabs or unsure about. You have to have your team settled. And better place than Limerick, and also then the fact that Cork are playing Galway the following weekend. So you've 2 massive games for Cork in terms of their team, in terms of their structure, in terms of their game plan coming up, and they need to get that right and then stick with that then going into the Munster Championship.
Like in the middle of the Munster Championship, Patrick Hogan is going to turn 34 years of age. Now, he hasn't started the first 2 games. He's still a vitally important part, will be a Cork legend no matter what. Do you get any sense that he may not be a guaranteed starter this weekend? Even Conor Lehane's return, playing him inside, the fact that he was popping the ball around lovely and setting up goal chances earlier, to me, it was like a marked change in how he played. But what about that Lehane-Horgan thing? Can you see them both playing? Do you think Horgan's place is in any way not guaranteed anymore?
Well, that's a $64 million question that I'm not going to answer here with you. But like you know what I mean? That you said Hoggy is there, but from a free taking perspective and all of those, Hoggy is critical. Now, can you replace Hoggy with Shane Kingston taking the frees and for the reliability? You know what I mean, of nearly 96, 97% accuracy in the freeze. But you then have the work rate then of the Cork forwards has gone up. So that's another, question to answer. So Kingston has, that question to answer really about whether he plays Hoggy or doesn't play Hoggy. But again, it's a 20-man game now, so he's critical.
Yeah. Fintan, what do you think?
Yeah, do you think, John, that it's becoming like, I suppose, the team of Kingston, Fitzgibbon and Coleman, that it's becoming kind of almost their team in terms of their leaders? I mean, you mentioned the big names that have gone. There's kind of retirements and squad changes over the last couple of years. Like, do you see that trio, kind of their roles becoming more and more pronounced? Obviously, Coleman is captain as well this year.
Yeah, but I think like Fitzy needs to take on more responsibility. I think Shane Kingston needs to take on more on the big days when it matters most. When it matters most, and it'll matter most in the Munster Championship. And Coleman has to take on that responsibility. Luke Meade as well. And there's a few of those guys now that have taken over responsibility from Colin Spillane, Bill Cooper, Owen Cadigan, Danny Carney, Aidan Walsh, and those. They're all gone now. So it's up to those guys really now to step up. Patrick Collins in the goal and Sean O'Donoghue and those. They're all 23, 24. They need to step up now, take responsibility with the likes of Shane Barrett and Power and those coming in. So it's a huge ask because, you're coming up against Limerick, who've won 3 All-Irelands in the last few years. So, you know what I mean? And they're not going away. And if anything, they'll get better. So it's their team now, and they need to take responsibility and ownership of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the new schedule this year, the short, like it's only 2 weeks between the league final this year and say Cork and Limerick and Munster. From a manager point of view, is there a better system now that you're going to be able to plan and you have all the players as opposed to, before you might, after the league, you mightn't see them for 4 or 5 weeks and you're trying to prepare?
I've always advocated, Fintan, I've always advocated matches every week. I'm a great believer in that, and stop this cancelling matches for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and giving rests and giving breaks. Because as a manager, then it's extremely difficult to keep players taking over. How long do you give them off? Do you give them a break for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or do you bring them back and you know what I mean? And Kerry were caught last year with the COVID thing with Tyrone when they had an extra 2 weeks off. So I think it's hugely important, more and more now. The next 2 weekends for Cork against Limerick and against Galway, get your team right, get the focus right, get the structure right, and then, please God, you could get 2 wins there, potentially, and get over that, and then build for that momentum, then going into the championship, because it's going to be, as I said to you, every Sunday you have a game. You have to have your 20 in place, then you have to have your team right, your structure right, and don't change. You can't change it, on the first game or it has to be right now going in a few weeks' time.
Ger Meyler is obviously a player like of serious stature, and he's had plenty of injury issues over the years, but we've seen him a bit at full back lately for Cork. And Colin Spillane is gone, Owen Cadigan is gone, Robert Downey maybe kept back there, he may be moved out. But is Ger Meyler a very strong option, John, at full back?
Well, he's a superb athlete. He's a superb hurler, but he's been hard hit with injuries. He was a massive loss last year, even with his own club, Father O'Neill's. So Meyler, and he's played a bit with UCC and the Fitzgibbon, but he's not the biggest man. So, you could potentially then see a 6'4" fella going in on the edge of the square if Ger was there. But he's a fantastic hurler. But Cork have to decide on that with Niall O'Leary, Sean O'Donoghue, and whoever in the full back line. You know what I mean? And like my preference always was that Downey would play wing back. I think that more suits him. It probably more suits playing against Limerick, but it will suit against Galway as well. So I think that Cork need to really identify the best player that they have for full back. But positions are interchangeable now. Shane, in there really is no positions because everybody is so mobile and they're you have to be able to defend, you have to be able to mark your man, and to be aware of space and to sense the danger where it's coming.